In my previous life, I had nothing to show for my life, so I took my husband's concubine, born son, Chen Feng, to be raised under my care. I found the best teachers for him, instructing him thoroughly in both literature and martial arts so that he could one day take charge of the entire Marquis Manor. I selected the finest young lady in the capital for his marriage, hoping he would enjoy marital harmony and fill his house with children and grandchildren. However, in the end, my once healthy body suddenly fell gravely ill. I was bedridden and tormented by sickness for several years. On the day I lay on my deathbed, Chen Feng sat by my side, his voice icy cold. "Mother, my entire life has been manipulated by you. Do you know how much I hate you for it? Even my marriage wasn't something I could decide for myself. I couldn't marry the woman I truly loved. I've had enough. All these years, I've had people secretly poison your food. Every bit of pain and suffering you've endured these past few years is well deserved." My eyes widened in disbelief. When I opened them again, I had returned to the day I was choosing which son to raise. Before I could say a word, Chen Feng had already pointed at me and declared, "I don't want her to be my mother." With just that one sentence, I knew that Chen Feng had also been reborn. The originally quiet front hall instantly erupted into commotion. My husband, Chen Yuan, furrowed his brows slightly. Among the dozen or so concubine-born sons present, Chen Feng stood out with his intelligence and handsome appearance. Chen Yuan had always been somewhat pleased with him, but that trace of approval vanished like smoke in an instant after those words. "Since when do you get to pick and choose? Who do you think you are?" Chen Yuan's cold voice snapped Chen Feng back to reality. He was only 6 years old now, merely an ordinary son of a concubine. Far from the powerful and influential Marquis of Jing he had become in his previous life. He pressed his lips together tightly, realizing he had spoken out of turn, and tried to salvage the situation. "Father, please calm your anger. Your son only feels that my birth mother is still here. If I were to leave her to serve mother instead, it would be unfilial." In my heart, I laughed coldly. In his previous life, he had shown me respect on the surface, but behind my back, he often complained to others that I wasn't his real mother and only knew how to harshly discipline him, never treating him like my own flesh and blood. Yet on one hand, he said such things while enjoying all the benefits and privileges of being raised as the legitimate son. Chen Yuan frowned, about to reprimand him. I calmly cut in. "This child is truly filial." Chen Feng's expression darkened, as if afraid I might decide to take him in. He hastily spoke up again. "I beg mother to fulfill this son's filial heart." I didn't even bother looking at him. I simply used the tea lid to skim off the foam and said lightly, "There are many children like this in the manor. I wasn't particularly interested in you to begin with, so you needn't worry about this matter." Soft chuckles rose in the hall. Chen Feng froze, his body stiffening for a moment. My sister-in-law from the second branch covered her mouth with a handkerchief and laughed softly. She had always seen this 8th young master as quiet and reserved, never imagining he fancied himself such a sweet catch. Anyone who didn't know better might think we were fighting to the death to raise him. Those mocking laughs landed on Chen Feng's face like slaps. In his previous life, after being raised by me, everything had gone smoothly for him. Scenes of direct humiliation like this were completely foreign to him. For a moment, he clenched his fists tightly, his face paling, unsure how to respond. I gave him an indifferent glance and paid him no further mind. My gaze shifted to the other sons in the hall, though I felt some hesitation in my heart. In my previous life, I had chosen Chen Feng because it was a chilly day in the 3rd month and he was wearing only a thin padded jacket, standing in the hall shivering nonstop. The birth mother he had longed for his entire life hadn't actually taken good care of him, seeing him as a pitiful young child who kept calling me mother so affectionately. I had casually pointed him out and chosen him. Now, looking back, whether he was pitiable or not had nothing to do with me. Blood relation or not wasn't determined by words alone. My eyes moved slowly and finally settled on the 5th young master standing at the very back. In my previous life, I hadn't cared for him much, but during the years when I was gravely ill, among all the sons, only he frequently returned from outside to visit me. At that time my mind was clouded by illness, and I once asked him in confusion why he was so filial. He smiled and replied, "My birth mother passed away early. There are many sons in the manor, and I am the most unremarkable one. Even my own wet nurse didn't take me seriously. When I was 9 years old during a bitterly cold winter, my wet nurse brought her own child into my room to sleep while making me sleep in the servants' quarters with not even a decent blanket. I had nowhere to turn and no one to ask for help. I nearly froze to death in that cold servant's room. It was Mother who discovered this when she came to visit my courtyard. I still remember how furious you were back then. You immediately sold off that wet nurse and replaced all the servants in my courtyard. In the years that followed, although I wasn't raised directly under your care, you always looked after me. Those years weren't particularly promising, but I never suffered again. Mother, he said while gently massaging my legs that could no longer move, I am only alive today because of you. Hearing those words, I didn't know what to feel. I had poured my heart and soul into raising Chen Feng, yet he hated me to the bone. This child, on the other hand, remembered all the things that were simply my duty over the years. Moreover, when I was still healthy and useful to rely on, he had never come to disturb me. Only when I fell seriously ill and no one else cared did he visit frequently. Seeing that I still hadn't decided, Chen Feng raised his eyebrows slightly and stepped forward. Mother, actually, this son isn't unwilling to be raised under your care. As long as you don't force me to do things I don't want, I am still willing. I waved my hand toward the silently standing fifth young master behind the crowd. Come here. Chen Lin was clearly stunned. Since I was choosing a son to raise personally, naturally the younger the better. He was already 10 years old. Hesitating as he prepared to step forward, Chen Yuan grabbed my hand. Madam, he is already quite old. It would be better to choose someone younger. Chen Lin withdrew his foot, his head bowing even lower. I smiled faintly. What does age matter? Character is what counts most. I think this child is excellent. Chen Lin suddenly lifted his head, his eyes filled with surprise and cautious gratitude. The matter was thus decided. When my husband and I brought Lin to the ancestral hall, Chen Feng stood behind us in a daze, as if still unable to recover. Since Lin was 10 years old, according to the rules he couldn't stay in the same courtyard as me. I was about to have someone clean up the adjacent green bamboo court. Suddenly, I recalled that in my previous life, after Chen Feng turned 10, he had also moved there. I had thought the place was quiet and suitable for him to study and practice martial arts, and being close to me would make it convenient to look after his daily needs. But he had only stayed less than a month before throwing a tantrum and demanding to change courtyards, claiming he wasn't used to it. Thinking about it now, it was probably because he felt too constrained living so close to me. Having lived another life, I naturally didn't want to invite trouble for myself or turn good intentions into something bad. So I asked Lin, choose a courtyard for yourself. Wherever you like. Mother will have it arranged for you. As if he had already thought it through, he immediately pointed toward green bamboo court. This son thinks this place is very good. The maid beside me, Ding Lan, chuckled. Young master, we want to be closer to madam. Lin's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. I couldn't help but laugh as well. It seemed the children were indeed quite different from one another. 3 days later, Lin moved into green bamboo court. The several sets of spring clothes I had ordered for him from outside were also delivered. Among them were 3 sets made from fine gauze fabric transported from Jiangnam, especially breathable and comfortable for spring and summer. I was holding one up to measure against Lin's body when Ding Lan entered from outside and whispered in my ear, Madam, Concubine Chun is causing a huge commotion in her courtyard. Concubine Chun was Chen Feng's birth mother. In my previous life, during the winter when I took in Feng, this concubine Chun had caught a cold and passed away. I only learned about it later. Chen Feng had always believed that I had deliberately sent an incompetent doctor to treat her, prolonging her illness and causing his birth mother's death so that he would wholeheartedly accept me as his mother. It was truly ridiculous. What happened? I asked. Feng says the servants in his courtyard have been skimping on his food rations. I frowned. This kind of thing had happened before in Lin's courtyard. After I dealt with it severely, such incidents had stopped in the manor. Does he have evidence? Ding Lan shook her head. What evidence could there be? The rations were clearly taken by concubine Chun herself for her own spending. Feng probably doesn't have enough to eat or wear, so he assumes the servants are cutting corners. Everyone in this manor knew concubine Chun's temperament. Even if there was nothing wrong, she could stir up trouble out of nothing, making a scene that left others unable to back down gracefully. Who would dare skim from her son's courtyard? I let out a cold laugh. Over the years, I had almost forgotten the character of Chen Feng's birth mother. There's no need to deal with him. The old madam in the manor had never felt at ease leaving children to wet nurses. Any child with a birth mother was left to be raised by her. If it were another child being skimped on by his own birth mother, I could take him in and have a wet nurse raise him. But for Chen Feng, since he had repeatedly declared in front of everyone that he wanted to be filial to his birth mother, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to separate mother and son. I turned and brushed a fallen petal off Lin's shoulder. Lin, do you think mother is mistreating him? His expression remained calm, showing little emotion over such a small matter. What mother does always has its reasons. He looked up at me, his eyes filled only with trust. Gazing into his bright black eyes, a sigh rose in my heart. In my previous life, if I had raised him, perhaps we could have enjoyed a lifetime of maternal love and filial piety. But having suffered greatly at Chen Feng's hands, it would be difficult for me to pour my whole heart into raising another child. No matter how good Lin was, I probably couldn't be as wholeheartedly devoted to him as I had been to Chen Feng before. Before dinner, I casually flipped through Lin's recent schoolwork. The children now studied at the family school in the manor. Lin's birth mother had not been favored by the old madam. She had given birth to him outside the manor, and only when he was 9 years old, after his mother passed away, was he brought back. That was when he began his education. If he studied with his older brothers, he naturally couldn't keep up, so he had to study with the younger ones. At 10 years old, he was still learning the 3-character classic, 100 family surnames, and 1,000-character classic alongside 5 or 6-year-olds. If he continued at their pace, he might not even start the 4 books properly until he was 15 or 16. During dinner, I asked him casually, "Would you like to change teachers?" His eating motion paused. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Wouldn't that trouble mother?" I laughed. "What trouble is there? Have you forgotten? Your maternal grandfather is the head academician of the Hanlin Academy. Finding a highly learned scholar to be your teacher is as easy as turning over my hand." Lin's chopsticks remained still. After a long while, he gently set down his bowl and chopsticks, stood up, and performed a deep bow to me. His voice carried a hint of choked emotion. "Thank you, mother." Even with my heart as hard as stone, hearing his tearful voice at this moment stirred something within me. I quickly helped him up. "Since you've called me mother, what is there to thank? If you truly want to thank me, earning the top score in the imperial examinations and bringing honor to me would be more than enough." The maids all burst into laughter, and a smile appeared on Lin's face. The teacher I found for Lin is the same renowned great scholar I sought for Chen Feng in my previous life. Utter Lu Chuan. It's not that I want to save effort, but someone as lazy and cunning as Chen Feng was still able to become a presented scholar under his guidance. I am very confident in trusting Lin to him. Elder Lu will arrive in the capital in the middle of the 3rd month. I woke up early that day, helped Lin dress neatly, and prepared to go out to welcome him. Though it was spring, the weather was still cold. Before leaving, I personally draped a small white cloak over Lin's shoulders. He was nearly as tall as me. He looked up at me slightly, his bright black eyes smiling at me. Ding Lan, who was packing the luggage, suddenly looked out into the courtyard and whispered in confusion, "Why is Feng here?" My hands paused. I looked outside. Chen Feng was still wearing that same old, thin padded jacket, now with several more dark stains on the hem than a few days ago. He stood shivering slightly in the cold wind. His gaze darkened as he stared fixedly at my hands tying the cloak strings for Lin. Ding Lan no longer warmly invited him in as before. She only frowned and said, "Didn't the manor distribute new spring clothes to everyone a few days ago? Why is he still wearing that? If outsiders see it, they'll think Madam is mistreating him. How disgusting." The people in my courtyard, influenced by my attitude, had always been very amiable toward all the sons and daughters. But after Chen Feng's words in the front hall that day, Ding Lan had taken the lead in ignoring him. It seems she not only ignored him but thoroughly despised him. I curled my lips into a smile. He was deliberately dressing like this, of course with his own intentions. Ding Lan snorted coldly. "I heard that this 8th young master has been acting possessed lately. Every day he complains in his courtyard that his clothes aren't good enough, his shoes and socks aren't good enough, the food isn't good enough. He even says he should be the most noble master in the Marquis Manor. He's even argued with his own birth mother several times, calling concubine Chun useless for not being able to help him at all." The maid Jailan, standing nearby, sighed. "He's just a child, yet already so calculating. With concubine Chun's temper, how could she let him curse her like that?" Ding Lan laughed coldly. "How could she not? I heard she slapped him a few times." Feng was stunned by the slaps and burst into loud cries after a while. Ding Lan scoffed. I thought things had calmed down these past few days. Why has he come running to us again? No one in the courtyard paid him any attention or opened the door for him. He could only stand by the door and wait. He waited until we had finished packing and were about to head out. Then, with tears in his eyes, he stepped forward and called out to me in a weak, pitiful voice, "Mother." He looked utterly pathetic, exactly like the times in his previous life when he tried to act spoiled to avoid my scoldings for being lazy. Back then, I had treated him as my own son and felt immense pity for him. But now, I couldn't muster even half a shred of sympathy. I pretended not to see him and walked straight past. He took 2 steps forward, trying to grab the hem of my robe. "Mother, I'm so cold. I'm really very cold. My birth mother doesn't care about me at all. I still want to stay with mother." His hand hadn't even touched my robe when Lin blocked it. Lin frowned at Chen Feng's dirty little hand. "Mother is about to go out. Can't you see that? What if you dirty mother's clothes?" Seeing Lin standing in the way, Chen Feng's previous innocent face turned cold in an instant. A dark, adult-like gloom flashed in his shadowed eyes. "Fifth brother, are you deliberately preventing me from speaking with mother? Is mother only your mother and not mine?" Lin's expression froze. He was still young after all. Being hit with such a heavy accusation, how could he withstand it? Ding Lan sneered from the side. "Young Master Feng is still so young, yet his memory is so poor. Didn't you yourself declare in front of everyone that day that you didn't want our madam to be your mother, and only wanted to be filial to your own concubine Chun? What now? You've even abandoned your own birth mother and are rushing to claim our madam as yours." Chen Feng's face flushed red with shock and embarrassment. You're just a maid. How dare you speak to me like that?" In his previous life, Ding Lan had believed wholeheartedly that he would be my pillar of support. She thought that treating him well would make him even more grateful to me, so she had always cared for him attentively. Not to mention cold mockery like this, she had never even said a harsh word to him. No wonder he was so astonished now. He was used to all the servants and maids in my courtyard greeting him with smiles and obeying his every word. I couldn't be bothered to deal with him any longer. I led Lin toward the main gate, giving him careful instructions as we walked. Elder Lu is a great scholar renowned throughout the empire. When you meet him, you must show the utmost respect. Today is the first time teacher and student meet, so you must leave a good impression on Elder Lu. Chen Feng had been reluctantly following behind us. Suddenly he stopped, his voice trembling slightly. "Mother, are you really letting Elder Lu teach him?" No one paid him any attention. He gritted his teeth and chased after us, shouting loudly, "Mother cannot be so biased. If fifth brother can study under a great scholar, I want to study with Elder Lu as well." In my heart, I laughed coldly. In his previous life, forcing him to study had been like taking his life. I had to coax and persuade him constantly. With his aptitude, he had still managed to become a presented scholar in the 2nd tier. He should have been burning incense in gratitude. Yet here he was, turning around to bite the hand that fed him. Now that I was giving him freedom as he wished, he was accusing me of favoritism. "Are your eyes blind?" I said coldly to the 2 young servants behind him. "Hurry up and take him back. Or do you want him to keep rolling around and throwing a tantrum all the way to the main gate for everyone to laugh at?" The 2 servants jumped in fright. They had never seen me so angry before. They hurriedly stepped forward and forcibly carried Chen Feng away. Chen Feng's face was filled with shock and awkwardness. He hadn't expected me to be so strict with him. "Go tell concubine Chun that if she can't even look after a single child properly, there's no need for her to collect her monthly allowance this year. She doesn't need to leave her courtyard either. She can stay inside and reflect on herself." The trip went extremely smoothly. By the time we welcomed Elder back to the manor, it was already dark. After Lin and I dined with Elder Lu, I returned to my own courtyard. Ding Lan carried a lantern and approached, whispering close to my ear. "Concubine Chun hit Feng quite hard today. He could barely get out of bed. The old madam has already sent someone to bring Feng over and punished concubine Chun by deducting a full year's worth of her monthly allowance." I frowned slightly. In his previous life, relying on my influence, Chen Feng hadn't bothered to pretend to be obedient to please the old madam. Now that he had no support, he would probably stick to the old madam's courtyard permanently. My expression remained unchanged. I simply instructed Ding Lan, "Find a skilled doctor to treat concubine Chun's injuries, then take 80 taels of silver from the storeroom and deliver it to her. Tell her she did well, and as long as she shows more restraint in the future, it will be fine." Sure enough, Chen Feng stayed in the old madam's courtyard. The usually quiet and peaceful Pine Crane residence suddenly filled with lively laughter and chatter. When I went to pay my respects to the old madam, Chen Feng was lying across her lap, acting spoiled and endearing himself to her. The old madam hugged him as if he were a precious little treasure. This child is truly filial and clever. He should have been brought to my courtyard to be raised long ago. It's a pity he suffered so much in concubine Chun's courtyard all these years. As the old madam spoke, her expression toward me darkened. What kind of mother are you? You're busy with who knows what every day, not even knowing whether the children under your care have enough to eat and wear. That's one thing. But the other day, this child was nearly beaten to death by his birth mother. Where were you? She snorted coldly several times. Since you can't give birth yourself, are you hoping all these concubine-born sons and daughters will be beaten to death to satisfy you? Chen Feng leaned against the old madam's shoulder and shot me a sideways glance. He no longer had the innocent, lovable appearance he showed in front of her. I bowed slightly and said, "Old madam, this child is very filial. That day when I chose a son to raise under my name, he declared word for word in front of everyone that he would not acknowledge me as his mother and only wanted his own birth mother. Since mother and son are deeply attached as the legitimate wife, it wasn't convenient for me to interfere too much." The old madam's expression shifted slightly. She glanced at Chen Feng. Did that happen? Chen Feng shook his head repeatedly, tugging at the old madam's hand and acting coquettishly. Grandmother, how could Feng dare? In his heart, Feng respects and loves mother just as much as he respects and loves grandmother. It's only that mother is strict, so Feng doesn't dare to get as close to her as he does with grandmother. After speaking, he jumped down from the small couch, ran over to me, tugged lightly at my sleeve, and looked up at me with pleading eyes. Mother, did Feng do something wrong to make you dislike him? Mother, Feng was ignorant and didn't mean it. Please forgive Feng. I looked at him coldly, waves of chill rising in my heart. The soul inside this small body had not long ago personally sent me, his legitimate mother who had raised him, to my death, yet now he could act so innocently and spoiled in front of me. The old madam stroked his hand and sighed. Look, isn't such a good child even closer than your own flesh and blood? In my opinion, you should just take him back and raise him under your care. One is too few, 2 or 3 would make things livelier and more joyful. Moreover, such a fine child being born to a concubine is truly a waste. He should have been the legitimate son of our Marquis Manor. A fleeting, hard-to-conceal gleam of triumph flashed in Chen Feng's innocent eyes. I sneered inwardly. So this is what you've been waiting for? I smiled and said warmly, let Feng choose for himself. Feng, do you want to stay here and keep grandmother company, being filial to her, or come to mother's side to play with your 5th brother? The smile that had filled his face cracked in an instant. He instinctively looked to the old madam for help, but unexpectedly, she was also looking at him with eager anticipation. Fighting for prospects for her favored grandson was one thing, but having this clever child lean toward her and stay by her side was another matter entirely. The smile on his face gradually stiffened. He forced the corners of his lips upward, pretending not to understand. Grandmother is advanced in age. Feng naturally wants to stay by her side to keep her company. He practically gritted his teeth to say it. The old madam, noticing nothing amiss, laughed heartily with delight. Good child, come here to grandmother. Chen Feng forced a joyful expression as he walked over to the old madam and let her embrace him. Good, good. Stay here with grandmother then. It's better to be by grandmother's side. Grandmother loves you dearly. The idea of making him the legitimate son under my name was pushed to the back of the old madam's mind. If Chen Feng dared to mention it again later, it would carry the implication of abandoning grandmother to seek shelter with me. With those words, he didn't dare bring the matter up again himself. When I returned to the courtyard, I happened to catch practicing martial arts inside. It was early April, and he wore only a thin summer robe, his body covered in a fine sheen of sweat. He was still working through the same set of palm strikes and fist forms, yet compared to half a month ago, when his movements had been clumsy and sluggish, they now flowed as smoothly as water or drifting clouds. I had only told him to train so his body would grow strong, but he approached everything with such seriousness, studying every detail meticulously, and pouring his whole heart into it. Sometimes he became so absorbed that he wouldn't even hear me call him for meals. At lunch, he ate in his own courtyard. When I stopped by to check on him, he held chopsticks in one hand and a book in the other, brows furrowed in concentration, his expression so grave it hardly looked like he was eating at all. I stood beside him for a long time, but he still didn't notice me. Ding Lan chuckled softly and whispered, "Young Master Lin having lunch, or reading a book. Madam has been standing here for ages, yet he hasn't even stood up to greet you." Lin startled and looked up, only then realizing I was right beside him. He quickly rose and bowed. "Mother." This son was distracted for a moment and failed to notice Mother's arrival. I took the book from his hand. "If you're going to read, then read. If you're going to eat, then eat. Trying to do two things at once will only ruin your stomach and spleen. In the end, you'll lose more than you gain." His face flushed red at once. He lowered his head and said, "Mother is right. Today Elder Lu gave me the day off, so I should set the books aside. The spring scenery is so lovely right now. I ought to go outside for a stroll instead of exhausting my mind and body without caring for my health. Sooner or later that will only harm me." I spoke gently, offering advice. Once I finished, a wave of emotion rose unbidden in my heart. In my previous life I had painstakingly urged Chen Feng to study hard and focus. In this life, I found myself advising Lin to ease up and rest more. Lin scratched his head sheepishly. This son started his education far too late and is already far behind his brothers of the same age. If I grow lazy on top of that, I fear I'll disappoint Mother's hopes for me. For a moment I was at a loss for words. After a long pause, I finally said, "Mother wants you to succeed, but not so you can fulfill anyone else's expectations. I simply hope that once you're grown, you'll have the ability to stand on your own 2 feet and never again be controlled or manipulated by others the way you were before." Those words were exactly what I had once felt in my heart for Chen Feng. I had never demanded that he bring me any particular glory. If his talent proved ordinary and he could not inherit the Marquis manor, studying and training would still be enough for him to support himself, to avoid being controlled or deceived to the point where he could neither establish himself nor preserve the family fortune. And if he turned out exceptionally gifted and took charge of the Marquis manor, everything he learned would equip him to shoulder the entire Jing Marquis household without being crushed beneath the weight of his responsibilities. I had done everything in my power to give him wings, yet he had turned around and blamed the very hands that helped him fly. Setting those thoughts aside, I reached out and smoothed the slightly tousled hair on Lin's forehead. "Come on, let's go out with Mother to enjoy the spring. The scenery is too beautiful to waste." As we left the courtyard and passed by Pine Crane residence, I saw Chen Feng standing there with a book in his hands, his gaze darkening as he watched us. Ding Lan remarked beside me, "Young Master Feng has been incredibly diligent lately. I heard he's already started studying the 4 books on his own. Last time, Tutor Chu at the family school even praised him in front of the Marquis, saying that in all his decades of teaching, Feng is the brightest and most quick-witted child he's ever seen. Truly the makings of a top scholar." I laughed coldly in my heart. Of course a man in his 40s placed among 5 or 6-year-olds would look like the makings of a top scholar. We had walked quite a distance when I happened to glance back and saw Chen Feng still staring after us, his eyes dark with a hatred so intense it looked as if he wanted to skin us alive and pull out our tendons. In my previous life I had devoted myself to him so completely, yet he had still come to hate me enough to poison me. In this life, his resentment toward me was surely even deeper. A person like him could not be kept around. Has everything been arranged with concubine Chun? I turned and asked Ding Lan. "Madam, rest assured. She is my cousin from my mother's side of the family. Clever and cautious like no other. She won't miss the slightest movement." The following months passed in relative calm. In my previous life, concubine Chun had caught a cold and died at the end of the year. In this life, however, she ate well and slept soundly. Not only did nothing happen to her, she had even grown noticeably rounder and plumper. I heard that Chen Feng now visited concubine Chun once every few days. How strange. Why had Feng suddenly become so filial toward concubine Chun? Half a year earlier, he had refused to even step inside her room, and whenever they met he had always pretended not to see her. Ling Shuang sat by the brazier, idly twisting a thread between her fingers as she drawled lazily. "Isn't it strange indeed?" Ling Shuang added. "Yesterday when young Master Feng went over, he saw concubine Chun throwing dice in her room and frowned. He asked her, 'Aren't you feeling unwell at all?' The question didn't sound like concern. It sounded more like he was hoping his own birth mother would fall ill." Ding Lan spoke without thinking, then suddenly froze. He couldn't really be thinking that way, could he? If so, then that boy's heart is far too vicious. Does he actually want his own birth mother to die so he can beg the old madam to let madam raise him under her name? The room fell silent for a moment. All the maids turned to look at me. My needle and thread never paused, I merely glanced at them once. Don't speak nonsense outside. Just keep it in mind and stay on guard. Right now your cousin Ling Shuang is the one looking after concubine Chun. Remind her often to keep a close eye on that 8th young master. That winter, concubine Chun passed the season safe and sound. She even became pregnant. In contrast, Chen Feng worried himself into a minor illness. The old madam was beside herself with distress. She berated the doctor. If you cannot cure Chen Feng, you will be cutting off the future top scholar of the Marquis Manor. 10 months later, concubine Chun safely gave birth to the manor's 17th son. The baby had skin as white as snow and large, bright eyes. He was utterly adorable. Even the old madam, who had grown used to the arrival of grandsons, could not bear to put this one down. For a time her attitude toward Chen Feng grew noticeably cooler. The old madam had not meant anything by it, but in Chen Feng's eyes the change was unmistakable. Of course he would not stoop to competing for favor with a newborn, but he feared losing the old madam's affection and returning to the status of an insignificant, overlooked concubine, born son. He desperately wanted to bring up the matter of being recorded under my name again, yet he could never find the right moment to speak. After the Qingming festival, Ling Shuang, who had been serving in concubine Chun's courtyard all this time, suddenly came to my courtyard in the middle of the night carrying an exquisitely wrapped food box. Madam, these past few days the 8th young master has visited concubine Chun every few days and brought her pastries. This servant truly finds it suspicious, but I don't know whether there's anything wrong with the food itself. I lifted the lid. My hand jerked as if pricked by a needle and trembled violently. The wooden lid clattered to the floor. In my previous life, when I had fallen gravely ill, Chen Feng had brought me pastries every single day, each one carrying the faint, sweet scent of almonds, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. The plate before me smelled exactly the same. Only later had I learned that it was a special poison he had ordered someone to prepare. It smelled sweetly fragrant, tasted of nothing, and acted slowly, making it nearly impossible to detect. It seeped silently into the lungs and organs, corroding the blood and marrow until the victim suffered endless agony, while their limbs gradually grew numb and paralyzed. The 5 organs and 6 viscera wasted away step by step until the person could only lie bedridden, clinging to life for another 2 or 3 years before finally dying. For several years he had shown no hesitation. Now it seemed he had grown impatient. The amount of poison in these pastries was several times stronger than what he had used on me back then. The scent alone was noticeably stronger. Madame. Ling Shuang saw the change in my face and asked softly, "There really is something wrong with these pastries. In that case, if the 8th young master brings more in the future, should this servant secretly replace them, or expose him directly?" I remained silent for a moment before saying, "If he brings any more in the next few days, just keep them hidden. Do not let concubine Chun know. 7 days from now, have her take these pastries to the old madam's courtyard, and present them as a filial offering." Ling Shuang's face flickered with surprise, but she asked no further questions. She simply nodded and quietly withdrew. 7 days later, I brought the renowned physician Zhang Jin to take the old madam's pulse. Ever since giving birth, the old madam had suffered from recurring headaches that flared up with the changing seasons and had never fully healed. Physician Zhang Jin was a wandering doctor the Marquis had gone to great lengths to locate in Lu City and specially invited to the capital. As we entered, Chen Feng happened to be walking over from the side courtyard. A full year had passed, he had grown taller and seemed steadier in temperament. The moment he saw me he hurried forward with a warm smile. "Mother has arrived. The weather is still cold. Why didn't mother wear an extra layer? Did 5th brother not remind you?" He glanced toward Lin standing beside me and raised an eyebrow slightly. Lin lifted the edge of my cloak, his expression calm. "Mother's cloak is right here. 8th brother need not trouble himself." Chen Feng's face stiffened for an instant. He ignored Lin and continued smiling at me. "Mother, please come inside quickly, it's warmer in the room." Physician Zhang went in to take the old madam's pulse. Chen Feng personally poured me a cup of tea. This son knows mother likes maiden's tea. Last year I gathered some and let it age a few more days. The flavor is at its best right now. "Mother, please try it." I accepted the cup but did not drink. Chen Feng showed no reaction, he simply stood beside me with a faint smile. Physician Zhang had finished needling the old madam. She immediately felt her head grow much lighter. While she was thanking him nonstop, concubine Chun sashayed in with her soft waist swaying, carrying the same exquisite food box. The moment Chen Feng, who was standing attentively beside the old madam, saw the box, his expression changed drastically. Before concubine Chun could speak, he stepped forward to block her. Concubine mother, what are you doing with that? Concubine Chun felt nothing amiss and deliberately raised her voice toward the old madam. These pastries are delicious. I specially brought them to show filial respect to the old madam. Chen Feng's face betrayed open anxiety. He nearly shoved concubine Chun out the door. The old madam has tasted every delicacy under heaven. Besides, physician Zhang is here today. Birth mother should not embarrass herself. Concubine Chun flared up at once. Embarrass myself. I have never in my life heard of a child calling his own birth mother an embarrassment. What about physician Zhang? He's here. Let him judge. Is there any child in the world who speaks to his birth mother this way? The old madam frowned, about to order her out. I smiled and spoke first. Concubine Chun means well. Since physician Zhang is present, let us all sample these pastries together. The old madam was in a fairly good mood today and let concubine Chun's rudeness slide. Very well, bring them here and let me see what is so delicious. Unable to stop her, Chen Feng could only watch helplessly as concubine Chun placed the poisoned box of pastries in front of the madam and physician Zhang. His hands clenched tightly as he stared at the physician's face. He was gambling, betting that even a divine doctor like Zhang Jin would fail to notice anything unusual in the pastries. His gamble was not wrong. No matter how skilled Zhang Jin was, he specialized only in medicine and knew almost nothing about poisons. Unfortunately for him, before Zhang Jin had even arrived in the capital, I had already made sure he learned of this particular poison by chance. So the moment the lid was lifted and the faint, sweet almond scent wafted out, Zhang Jin's brows knitted tightly. Old madam. Zhang Jin raised a hand to stop the old madam from picking up a pastry. What is it, Dr. Zhang? Zhang Jin moved his lips, seeming to hesitate. In noble families, poisoning was hardly rare. He was merely an outside physician. There was no need for him to step into such murky waters. I tapped the teacup in my hand lightly. I had chosen Zhang Jin not only for his superb medical skills and respected reputation, but even more because he was an upright man who would not stand idly by. Sure enough, when the old madam once again lifted a pastry to her mouth, Zhang Jin could no longer remain silent. Old madam, please set that down for now. I fear there may be something wrong with it. The old madam was stunned. What could be wrong? Zhang Jin glanced around the room and said, might I trouble the servants to catch a few ants or small insects and bring them here? Though puzzled, the old madam trusted Zhang Jin and immediately ordered it done. Concubine Chun watched curiously, completely unaware that the matter would implicate her. Chen Feng stood in corner, his face ashen, cold sweat already beading on his forehead. At this point he could still have played dumb and shifted everyone's attention away from the pastries, letting the matter pass. But with physician Zhang present, exposure was only a matter of time. If that happened, his feigned ignorance right now would only convince everyone that he was the one who had poisoned the food. The only thing he could rely on now was a sliver of luck. The servants of the old madam's courtyard quickly returned with more than a dozen ants. Physician Zhang took a small piece of pastry, crushed it with his fingers, and dropped it into a bowl. The ants that had been scattering in all directions immediately swarmed around the sweet crumbs. Concubine Chun watched for a moment and said, Dr. Zhang, ants gathering around pastries. What's so strange about that? The words had barely left her mouth when one ant suddenly flipped onto its back, kicked its legs a few times, and lay completely still. Then a second, then a third. In the blink of an eye, every ant lay dead in a scattered heap. The old madam's face changed color at once. She glared at concubine Chun, her hand trembling slightly. You vile woman. Are you trying to poison me to death? Concubine Chun finally understood. Terrified, she waved her hands frantically. This has nothing to do with me. Feng brought these to me a few days ago. I ate quite a few myself. At those words her expression shifted again. She stared at Chen Feng, who stood silently in the corner, in utter shock. Feng, these pastries, you were the one who gave them to me to eat. You wanted to poison me to death. Every face in the room displayed a different shade of horror. The breath Chen Feng had been holding finally escaped in a rush, but he was no ordinary child. After that brief moment of panic, he immediately put on an innocent, bewildered look. Birth mother, what are you saying? Who would want to poison you? Physician Zhang's gaze moved back and forth between concubine Chen and Chen Feng before he spoke slowly. While this substance can kill these small insects instantly, it is not quite so lethal to humans. Before Ling Shuang had come to report to me, concubine Chen had already eaten quite a few of these pastries. Worried, he asked, so eating a few boxes occasionally would be fine. Physician Zhang replied, occasional use is not dangerous, but this poison is extremely difficult to expel from the body. If taken continuously for half a year or more, the accumulated toxin will first cause numbness in the limbs, dizziness, and shortness of breath. After a full year, the limbs will lose normal function, the 5 organs will be completely ruined, and the victim will be unable to eat solid food, only thin broth to barely stay alive. Even then, they can linger for another 2 or 3 years. Gasps filled the room. Everyone recoiled from the box of pastries in horror at the poison's cruel and insidious nature. Concubine Chen threw herself at Chen Feng, beating and cursing through her tears. I knew there was something wrong when you suddenly started bringing me things every day to curry favor. I thought you had finally grown up and learned to be filial. Who could have guessed you heartless, vicious little beast wanted to poison your own birth mother to death? You were hoping I would die, so you could beg the old madam to let the madam raise you under her name and become the legitimate son, weren't you? You ungrateful, conscienceless wretch, evil spawn, little beast, bastard. No amount of excuses or calculations could save Chen Feng from the storm of slaps and curses raining down on him from concubine Chen. The old madam, who had always doted on him, sat coldly to one side. The warmth that had once filled her eyes was gone. Even if concubine Chen beat him to death on the spot right now, it seemed the old madam could not be bothered to say a single word to stop her. Poisoning one's own birth mother at such a young age was something most people would never believe. Yet when applied to a child who had never been close to his birth mother and had suddenly begun showing excessive filial piety by bringing her pastries every day, the story became far more believable. In the end, there was no ironclad proof that the poison had definitely come from Chen Feng. But once the suspicion and the rumor that he had tried to poison his own mother took root, Chen Feng had no path left to turn back. At first he still tried to attend the family school, hoping his reputation as a top scholar talent might salvage the situation. But the tutor who had once favored him now treated him as invisible, and refused to answer even when he asked questions. The brothers he had once looked down on now wouldn't even spare him a glance. He struggled for 2 days before finally giving up and retreating to his small room. Of course, it was no longer the room in the old madam's courtyard. He was sent back to concubine Chen's courtyard, where she, disgusted by him, gave him nothing better than a servant's quarters. The arrangement broke every rule, yet no one spoke up for him anymore. Gradually he stopped leaving his room altogether, shrinking into a corner of the Marquis' manor like a beaten, rain-soaked dog. 10 years slipped by in the blink of an eye. In the 8th year of the Zhouyuan reign, 7 children from the manor sat for the imperial examinations. The eldest and third brothers both passed the provincial level. Lin had the great fortune of being named a Tanhua, the 3rd highest rank in the imperial examinations, by the emperor himself. The Marquis' manor had never known such joy. The main hall was thrown open, a grand banquet laid out, and the entire residence rang with celebration. Elder Lu drank a few cups too many in his excitement and praised Lin without restraint, his eyes growing misty by the end. In this lifetime, teaching a student like this means I have not lived in vain. Some offered comfort, others congratulations. I stood outside the crowd and watched. Suddenly I remembered that in my previous life, when Chen Feng had passed the imperial examinations, Elder Lu had not touched even a single cup of celebratory wine. He had packed his bags and returned home immediately. Before that, he had repeatedly asked the manor to release him from his duties. Chen Feng's lazy and cunning nature had led Elder Lu to hint to me several times that if the boy ever entered officialdom, it might not be a blessing for the Marquis' manor, or for the common people. Back then I had simply thought he was still young and would change once he grew up. Looking back now, a man like Lu Qian, who had taught countless students, had seen through him far more clearly than I ever had. Lost in thought, I suddenly heard Ding Lan's tense whisper in my ear. Why has the 8th young master come out today? I looked up. Chen Feng stood in the garden, a wine jar in his hand, completely drunk. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on me. He was 17 now, the same age at which, in his previous life, he had passed the examinations as a young man and basked in the height of glory. Today, for the manor's celebration, he wore bright new clothes, yet his emaciated frame could not carry even a fraction of the noble young master's bearing. His skin, long deprived of sunlight, was sickly pale and carried a gloom that had never been there in his previous life. Seeing me look at him, his bloodless, cracked lips curved into a smile. Then he opened his mouth and spoke 2 words. Mother. That night, Ling Shuang pounded frantically on my courtyard gate. Madam, the 8th young master has gone mad. He just took an axe meant for chopping firewood and attacked concubine Chun and the little young master. He kept shouting that he is the one who should have his name on the golden list and become the next Marquis of Jing'an. I frowned and rose at once, leading several strong manservants from the manor as we rushed to concubine Chun's courtyard. He truly had lost his mind completely. Fortunately, the manservants acted swiftly and prevented him from harming anyone else. He was bound tightly and thrown at my feet, eyes bulging as he stared up at me. Mother, you remembered, didn't you? Or rather, you're just like me. You remembered everything from the very beginning. I leaned back lazily in my chair and looked at his half-dead state, then suddenly laughed. How stupid must someone be to only realize it now? I leaned forward, brought my lips close to his ear, and whispered softly, compared to what you once did to me, I have already been far too merciful.
Oh, that's right.
Lately, have you noticed your limbs growing stiff? Do you feel dizzy and nauseous after eating anything? Chen Feng's pupils contracted sharply. Realization dawned on him. He suddenly doubled over and vomited violently. I straightened up, covered my nose and mouth with a handkerchief, and ordered. The 8th young master has lost his mind and injured both the little young master and concubine Chun. Tomorrow morning at first light, when the city gates open, send him to the manor's estate outside the city. Let him recuperate there in peace. The manor is full of joyous occasions these days. Don't let this unlucky creature ruin the Marquis's or the old madam's mood. I turned and left. Behind me, Chen Feng's heart-wrenching screams tore through the air. It was you, you vile woman. It was always you. You're the one who wanted to harm me. You're the one who harmed me. Mother, isn't it because I chose my birth mother instead of you? If I kill all of them now, I'll still be your Feng still the child you loved most. Don't touch me. I am the Marquis of Jing'an. I am the legitimate son raised by the madam herself. What is concubine Chun? What is that bastard spawn of hers? So what if I cut them a few times? Even if I killed them all, what of it? Mother, I beg you, don't abandon me. I am Feng the child you held and raised from infancy, the one you loved most. Chen Feng lived another 3 years at the estate outside the city. I specially instructed an old woman there to feed him 3 meals a day so he would not carelessly starve to death. Those 3 years, lying on a sickbed, must have felt very comfortable indeed. Lin placed first on the golden list and entered the Hanlin Academy. Countless families in the capital wanted to take him as a son-in-law, yet every time I brought up the subject he would only act spoiled and dodge the topic. This son is still young and wants to stay by mother's side a few more years before settling down and starting a family. This son has not yet established himself firmly in the Hanlin Academy. This year's zodiac conflicts with mine, so it is not suitable to discuss marriage. Next year doesn't seem very good either. I was truly at my wit's end. I was not in a hurry to chase him out and force him to marry. The problem was that he refused to marry at all. His eyes stayed glued to me from morning till night. Mother, didn't physician Zhang say you must not eat cold foods? Who brought these jujube blossom cakes? Don't you know mother cannot eat anything too sweet or rich? It's still chilly in spring. Why are you sleeping with the courtyard windows open? Why did you move the cinnamon trees into the courtyard? You can't tolerate pollen. So annoying, truly annoying. If there is a next life, I definitely will not choose him again. Never mind. I suppose I will just choose him one more time.